Hello and welcome to Windows in Time, Moonville Rediscovered, what history and genealogy reveal about a once thriving community in Sam's Valley, Oregon, presented by Jackson County Library Services and the Southern Oregon Historical Society. I am Leah Pastizo, Digital Services Specialist. This program is being recorded. Please mute your microphone and turn off your camera to ensure quality recording. There will be a time to answer your questions at the end of the program. Jackson County Library Services acknowledges that its libraries are located within the traditional lands of the Shasta, Takelma, and Tlakawa people, whose descendants are now identified as members of the Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians and Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde, as well as of the Cow Creek Band of Umpqua Tribe of Indians and Modoc Nation, who were forced to relocate to Oklahoma. We take this moment to recognize the indigenous peoples whose traditional lands are where residents of Jackson County live today. JCLS is committed to fostering understanding, deep respect, and honor for indigenous people, and we encourage you to learn more about the land you reside on. For more information, go to jcls.org/land. The views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the presenter and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Jackson County Library Services. And now I'm going to hand it off to our next speaker.
Hi, I'm Alice Mullally. I'm a volunteer with the Southern Oregon Historical Society, and I'd like to welcome all of you who are both through Zoom and those of you who are here in the audience. One thing about coming up with the Historical Society. Well, first I want to say thank you to all of you who made our plant sale last weekend such a great success. It was really wonderful. And then there's a brand new exhibit at the History Center in Medford on winemaking. This is an exhibit from the Oregon Historical Society, but the Southern Oregon Historical Society has added some really interesting artifacts. You know, they put up wine in these huge jars, but they shipped it that way. So if you've ever wondered how they could ship those huge jars of wine without them breaking, you will see an example of that at the exhibit. So 106 North Central is the History Center in Medford. Stop by the lobby and see the new exhibit on winemaking. And it is my privilege today to introduce the speaker. Moonville. Who ever heard of Moonville? That's one of the reasons that Anne is here to talk about it, because it's not someplace everybody knows about. And yet it is a local piece of our history. Anne Billeter is a librarian's librarian, an archaeologist, no. What do you do?
Librarian.
A genealogist, and a friend's friend. And I'm really pleased to introduce her today because she has so much expertise and knowledge. And if you want to know how to research anything, ask Anne. Anne Billeter.
Thank you. Thank you, Alice. So what she said is true. Moonville in Jackson County, Oregon, it was curiosity that led me to research Moonville when I ran across just a vague mention of it. I really had never heard of it, and I kind of was doubtful that there was such a place. It was a place. It was named for a person who settled here and grew his family here. The story, however, begins in Pennsylvania. In Susquehanna County, Andrew Sylvester Moon was born in 1830. As you can see, he was the firstborn. If we move one more, I have to get used to doing this technology. He was the first of at least 8 children, and there's a possibility there was a 9th. He was born in the Susquehanna County, But his brother Carlos was born in 1835, 5 years later, in the adjacent county, but quite close, as you can see. That led me to discover the whole family. John Moon was the father in the 1840 census, with an exact match for the number of children, their ages, and their genders. So I'm pretty confident that John and Caroline Moon were their parents. And other researchers have also agreed with that. So how in the world do we start in Pennsylvania and move on? Well, luckily, we have an obituary of the last of Andrew's siblings to survive. And Emily Frances Moon, again, the daughter of John and Caroline Moon, was born in Susquehanna County, but this obituary took place in 1930 in Webster City, Iowa. And what I wanted to share with you from her obituary is that we learned how in the world they got to Iowa. In 1850, her father decided to try his fortunes in the West, and the family emigrated to Chicago, making the trip by train to Buffalo, and from there on the Great Lakes to Chicago and to Elgin, where they lived for 6 years. Then they decided to move farther west to Iowa. They made the trip overland, reached their destination, which was Fort Dodge, when Fort Dodge was a government fort. And as the obituary states, the entire situation was as primitive and true to pioneer tradition as can well be imagined. Well, sometimes it's hard for us to imagine. So here's a sense of the distances. From Susquehanna County to Buffalo by train, all the way through the Great Lakes on the water to Chicago, and then to Elgin, which is quite nearby, and which you might recognize from watches and clocks made by Elgin. And then 6 years later, or maybe a little sooner in the case of Andrew, to Iowa. And as you can see from this map, this is the year that they did that trip as far as Chicago. And look what our country looked like then. Quite a bit of change. Now, Andrew actually purchased land in Iowa on November 7th of 1855. So I suspect as the oldest, he would have been 25 by that time, that he may have gone ahead to scout out the area. I don't have any way of knowing that. That's just a hypothesis. This gives you a sense of Iowa in 1856, just a year later. And you can see Webster County is quite large. It isn't that large anymore. It was divided later. And we have proof that he was there, not only from his property purchase, but also from a territorial census that was taken in 1856. And here he is, Andrew Sylvester Moon, age 25, and he has been in Iowa 1 year. He's born in Pennsylvania. He's a farmer. He is a native voter, which means he was born in the United States, not a naturalized citizen. And he is eligible for the militia, prime age for it, actually, if that should be needed. Notice that he is single. There is no other Moon with him. This is the actual document that was issued for the property. This is the top portion of the document. It's fairly large, and I wanted to make it large enough for you to be able to see it. So Andrew Moon, now of Webster County, Iowa, purchasing at Fort Dodge. And this is the legal description of the land, which I'm not going to read to you, but it did contain 160 acres. And it was issued to him officially in 1857. I don't know whether that means that's when he finished paying for it or when the paperwork made it through the bureaucracy. But this also, for those of us who really care about our history, was the 81st year of our independence as the United States of America. And I love the fact that that is delineated on these documents. And who was president then? James Buchanan. Now, only 2 years after that document was issued, Andrew sold the land. Now, he originally purchased it for $1.25 an acre, cost him $200 for the 160 acres. And here he is 4 years later, paying $500, being paid $500 for that same land. It's a pretty good profit in a shorter period of time. I want to draw your attention to the fact that the witness to this sale of the land was named Benjamin Pettyplace. That name will occur again during this hour. Now, Andrew next appears in 1859 or 60. Now, that document was in April of 1859. But Walling's History of Southern Oregon says that he was here in Jackson County by 1859. I don't know whether that's accurate or whether it's being a little liberal with the dates. It's a far piece to go from Iowa to Jackson County, Oregon in 1859. In 1860, however, he was definitely here. He was enumerated in the Table Rock precinct of Jackson County, which was a large area geographically. And note, this is 1860s, pretty early in our history, our white history. Jacksonville was the post office. It was just about the only one. It was a long ways from the Table Rock precinct. And he is still alone. And he's born in Pennsylvania, still the same person, A.S. Moon. He is a farmer. He says he has 150 value of real estate and 600 of personal property. I wish I had a list of what he had. Note also that his neighbors on one side were the Livingstons and on the other side were the Pankeys. Pankey is a well-known name in Jackson County history, especially the Sams Valley area. Now, I think I have to put my glasses on. What I'm seeing is pretty small. Okay, this is from the historygeo.com subscription website. And what it is showing us is the names of the first landowners. In our state, the land initially came from the federal government, whether it was a homestead, a donation land claim, or an outright sale. So that's what History Geo has done. It has put together that information and provided us with links to the Bureau of Land Management's website with all those wonderful documents, like the one I showed you for the Iowa property. So here we are down at the bottom of the screen. There's the Livingston families, the Moon property, and the Pankey property. I believe I know where the enumerator went that day that he wrote them down in the 1860 census. The year on the map is the year that their claims were finalized. Also up here is a name that is kind of unfamiliar. It says Niettaplace, but I believe this is an error for Pettyplace. I think that Benjamin Pettyplace, who witnessed the land document in Iowa, is the same person who was the first landowner of this land, quite close to Andrew Moon. We don't know whether they traveled together, whether one of them wrote to the other saying, come west, there's great land here. All we know is that here they are, close to each other again. To give you a sense of where we are in today's terms, this is from Google Maps. Down along the bottom is Sams Valley Road. Going north is Ramsey Road. There's the Pankey Park Cemetery, which has been known over the years by many other names, including Sams Valley Cemetery and perhaps even Moonville Cemetery. Up here is some of the property that had Livingston, Moon, and Pankey in a row. That's right along Pelton Lane. And then this other red dot is more land that Andrew owned. I didn't try to show all of his land. I just wanted to have those of you who are from Sams Valley or familiar with our Jackson County geography to have a sense of where we're talking about today. Notice over here, it says Sams Valley. It took me a long time as a result of the research I did to realize why those words are where they are. We'll get to that shortly. In the meantime, don't forget Andrew arrived in 1859 or 60. It was pretty primitive. Now, we don't know that this is what was there then or shortly after, because this photograph and the next one are in the Southern Oregon Historical Society's photograph collection without a date. Did you write down the date of all your photographs on them? Ha. Does anyone do that? Here's another one. This, I suspect, is more recent than the first one, but I do believe this gives us a reminder that what we're talking about is long, long ago and very different from the scene that we see today. Now, in 1865, Sam was 35 years old and he married. He married Miss Melissa Jane Cox. And they traveled to the courthouse in Jacksonville in order to get their license and to become married on the same day. And they were married by someone well known to local historians, Moses Williams, M.A. Williams, who lived nearby. When I say nearby, I mean near Jacksonville, and who married many couples in the early history of Jackson County. Quite nearly about 9 months to 10 months later, Laura Ellen Moon was their firstborn, born in 1866 in January. Grant, their first son, was born a year later in 1867. Tragically, he died of diphtheria in 1868 in October. And that date you want to remember for just a minute, October 4th of 1867. I mean, pardon me, 8, because here's his gravestone that is in what is today known as the Pankey Park Cemetery. And a month later, Melissa gave birth to another son, Charles Arthur Moon. And that means that when she lost Grant, she was 8 months pregnant. The year after that, Ralph was born. Pardon me, 2 years later, Ralph was born. And there's a controversy that seems unresolvable about whether he was born in April or in January. On the 1870 census, here's the family with possibly, and I believe that this is John A. Moon, the brother of Andrew, all the way from Pennsylvania. Both of them were born in Pennsylvania. And I don't know why he's shown in a Chinese person's household, or whether that's accurate, or whether in fact the census taker goofed and the Moons were in one household rather than separated. But there's Andrew, and now his name is finally spelled out, Andrew S. Moon. And you can see that his value, both of real estate and of personal property, has increased. And his wife is listed as Jane. That's one of the reasons I pointed out that Melissa J. Cox' middle name was Jane. And in this census, she was referred to as Jane. Some documents do call her Jane, others refer to her as Melissa. It's one of the challenges of genealogy. Laura's age is incorrect. We know she was born in 1866, after they were married, not 7 years ago. And all the other documents and information gives her correct age. And there's Charles. Notice Grant is not there because he died between two censuses. If we did not have that newspaper article and the gravestone, we would not even know about that tragedy. And then we have a child who is, according to this, 6/12 years old and unnamed at this point. Now, that's very different from the way we do things today, where we ponder what it will be the right name for our forthcoming child. but there are many traditions cultures in which the child's name is chosen afterwards. And we don't know the reason behind this. We also don't know why this says January here for the month of his birth. This is where that discrepancy comes in. Again, another challenge for genealogists. I personally think it has to do with the fact that the census taker didn't get to the Moon household until August, but he's supposed to be reporting who was in the household on June 1st. 2 years later, twins. I told someone when I was practicing for this that Melissa only had 12 pregnancies instead of 13, and she just looked at me and said, 12 pregnancies. You have to put it in perspective. Now, here we have the record of the appointment of postmasters to Jackson County, Oregon. From this particular document covers the time period from 1865 to 79. I'm sorry, I'm off one document. This is the postmaster's letter to the Postmaster General trying to create Sam's Valley Post Office, but someone misspelled it, SAHMS apostrophe S. And when I look at this, it's really hard to read, but I believe it says SAM apostrophe S. I can't prove that. It's too hard to tell. Now, I don't even know if I had the original in front of me. It's in Washington, DC, and I've never seen the original. The only person who may have seen it that I know of is Ben Truey. We have this document available to us free on the Southern Oregon Historical Society's website because Ben Truey went back to Washington, DC and scanned all the documents relating to the post offices of Jackson County. What a treasure for our history hunters. This does give the location of the proposed post office as the southeast quarter of section 30, township 35 south, range 2 west. You remember I said the name Sam's Valley on the map was there for a reason? It's right there. Here's the document I was trying to discuss, the record of appointment of postmasters. And this tells you that it was first formed in 13 February 1873. And that was when James W. Hayes was appointed. And then it was changed to Sam's Valley, and James W. Hayes was still the postmaster on the 21st of March. So they corrected the spelling between February and March. And then this is a list of those first 4 postmasters with when they took office. Well, that's a little too early for what we're looking for. So here is a document that I found because the Rogue Valley Genealogical Society had volunteers who took a scrapbook that was donated to them, and the scrapbook has oversized and has newspaper clippings that someone faithfully pasted into huge number of pages, absolutely huge. Our volunteers scanned those pages and then indexed every single name. It currently is in 5 volumes in the library at the Rogue Valley Genealogical Society. And here was the clipping that was taken from the Mail Tribune of 1974, reporting a story that was, this is the story that was in the 1974 newspaper right here in Medford, reporting on the diary entry of Wellborn Beeson 100 years earlier. In February 18th of 1874, Wellborn Beeson reported on the organization of a grange in Sam's Valley. And among it's a long story, so I just snipped a little bit of it about the Moons. They had several of the people coming to Sam's Valley to instruct the Sam's Valley people who were interested in how to form the grange. Took several days. So they joined together in one location and stayed in nearby homes. The Moons were to be at the Sizemores. They had left their children, twins, 2 years old, that's Newman and Truman, a boy 3 years old, that's Ralph, another boy 5 years old, that's Charles, and a girl 8 years old, that's Laura Ellen, with John Dixon, 17, in charge of them. Now, to us, that sounds horrific, all those little ones, but don't forget, they were men by the age of 17. They were expected to take serious responsibility. They did the farm work right alongside their fathers. And the girls did the household work and whatever farm work they could right next to their mothers. So he goes on, we were instructing very nicely until about 9:30 when the dogs at Nichols' place began to bark. Now remember, this is 9:30 at night in February. Mrs. Nichols went outside and noticed it was as light as day. She looked around and perceived a great fire off towards Moon's house, a distance of 1¼ miles. She gave the alarm and we all rushed out and soon discovered it was Moon's house on fire. Mr. Nichols and Cannon got horses and rode over. They found John Dixon had saved the children, and that was all. Even their clothing was gone. It seems the chimney was poor and the fire had caught after all the children were asleep. They woke up just in time to escape alive. Sizemore sent a team over and brought the children to his house, and all were comfortable this morning. Well, that's a comparative term. Anyone who's been through the Almeida fire knows what it's like to lose everything except your life. Beulah was born 2 years later in 1874. George William was born in 1878. Andrew Sylvester Moon Jr., that's always a challenge for genealogists and historians when you have two people with the same name from different generations, was born in November of 1879. And here they are, a much larger family than they were in 1870. This is now 1880. They're still in the Table Rock precinct. This is in June. And look who is the census taker. I believe that's Wellborn Beeson, the diarist. Note that he even noted they were twins, Truman and Newman, right there. Now, Andrew did become the postmaster of the Sams Valley Post Office. This is a snippets from that same document series. It's not the same page, but it's a different page covering the period from 1878 to 1893. And this is showing that Sams Valley had Mr. Stanley, Mr. Grazi, Mr. Payne, and then here's Andrew S. Moon on the 4th of August of 1881. And he was the postmaster until the 17th of November of 85. So for more than 4 years. Martha Nora was born in 1881. Clara was born in 1883, but lived 6 days. And here is the building that proves Moonville. Well, no, it doesn't. It doesn't say Moonville anywhere on there, does it? It is the Sams Valley Hall. A.S. Moon is on the left and A.C. Stanley is on the right. There's a general merchandise store and the post office, and then the drugstore. And the caption in the book states that these are the stores of A.S. Moon and Dr. A.C. Stanley, Sams Valley, Jackson County. This is what appeared as a lithograph, a drawing in the 1884 history of Southern Oregon. It's pretty. We don't know what it really looked like, but I'm assuming that this is faithful to the structure itself. Notice the 2 windows upstairs. This is a fairly large upstairs, and it becomes quite important to the community, as you will see. This is another drawing in that same book, and I just wanted you to see this in order to contrast this with those cabins that we saw at the beginning. We don't know that it was quite this pretty, but it does give you a sense of how the farm would have grown, the ranch or farm, whichever. This was Oscar Ganyard, and I tried to find where this would have been on History Geo, and it looks to me like it was a fair distance from the post office. It wasn't near it. Now, I was quite surprised to discover a large bound plat book of some of our major towns in Jackson County that was in the Southern Oregon Historical Society's collection. This particular drawing was filed in 1884, that same year that the book was published, and it is a plat of the town of Sam's Valley. Now, I did not know that it was ever considered to be a town. Yes, it had a post office. That doesn't necessarily make a town. This is a clearer image of the drawing, but I accidentally chopped off the word Sam's Valley, so I wanted to have that on the first one. Now, here is again a map, Google Maps showing today with a little broader outline to give some of you a sense of where we are. Here's that Sam's Valley Road. There are the words Sam's Valley. The red dot is where the post office was. That's McDonough Road, just to its east. There's Rock Creek Road. Over here is Dugan Road. Here's Sam's Valley Highway heading down towards Gold Hill. There's the present day Sam's Valley Elementary School. This is the first newspaper clipping I found that actually names Moonville. Now, that may be because we don't have a lot of earlier newspapers, because by the time we got around to microfilming newspaper, having that technology available, there weren't necessarily that many newspapers from so long ago still around. So we don't actually know that this is the first time Moonville was in a newspaper, but it's maybe. And this is telling us that even though it's 1884, the same year that book was published, Dr. A.C. Stanley has sold his drugstore. There was his name on that building. He sold it to Dr. W.F. Kramer, lately of Moonville, of Medford, and he intends to retire from active practice soon. I'll have to tell you, that's famous last words. He did not. But notice that this does say Moonville. They don't say Sam's Valley. It says Moonville. This is in the Jacksonville Democratic Times of 1884. John Lloyd Moon was born in 1885. They aren't through yet. And then their oldest daughter, Laura, is married. She married M.G. Davis. That stands for Marion Gabriel, and he was known as Gabe Davis, and they too went to the courthouse in Jacksonville for their wedding. William Andrew Davis was born in 1886 or possibly 1887. I'm sorry, no, he was born in 1886. This is Laura's son. This is the very first grandchild of Andrew and Melissa. But of course, Andrew and Melissa weren't through. They still had one more. This is their last son, and he may have been born in 1888 rather than 1887. There's a conflicting evidence. This is their 13th child, of whom 11 are now alive in 1887. Here's Moonville. W.H. Pankey has been carrying the mail between Moonville and Deskins, but has resigned. Deskins became Prospect. The name was changed shortly after this. Now we have a new newspaper, the Valley Record. And you may notice up here, it says image provided by the YMCA of Ashland. The historic newspaper, Oregon Newspapers Project is accepting funding in order to scan more local newspapers. And so various local organizations have taken it upon themselves to help make those things possible for us. In this case, the YMCA of Ashland did this for an Ashland paper. And when I first searched historic Oregon newspapers back in 2021, I found many fewer hits for the word Moonville. I found in April of this year, 165 mentions of Moonville in Oregon historic newspapers, almost all of them right here in Jackson County. That's amazing. So here we have a sale, and this is the only one I snipped. I did not show you, I will not show you all 165 newspaper clippings. That would take too long. So the Democratic Times in 1890 reports on the weather. Nothing has changed, has it? The cloudburst and rainstorm on the west side of Table Rock Mountain, they don't tell us which Table Rock, extended west as far as Moonville and did considerable damage one day last week. Had felt, I'm sorry, what does that say? To the depth of 6 inches during doing considerable damage to the grain and stripping the fruit trees within a limited area. I've been reading about hail and fruit trees during the many years I've lived here, and I don't go back that far. The old barn on the Coleman Place was almost destroyed by the wind, and considerable fencing was blown down. And there was a murder in Sam's Valley. I'm not going to give you that story. You'll have to look it up. As you can see, it's quite a considerable story because it goes on to the second page. And it was one of those things. Why is it that murders are newsworthy? It was picked up, the story was picked up by the Albany, Oregon newspaper. And it does say near Moonville, which was true. And then we have in 1891, another Ashland story, just reporting that A.S. Moon, father of Moonville, okay, in Sam's Valley, was up several days last week on business. Well, considering how they traveled in 1891, he probably was there for several days to make the trip worth it. Okay. But he is already being identified as the father of Moonville. Now, he was only the postmaster for 4 years, but he was a settler in that area from at least 1860 on. And he did have a large family. But I think that my hypothesis of why Moonville became the name of the community rather than Sam's Valley is because Sam's Valley refers to a region. It's a valley. It's pretty extensive, really, when you look at the map. And I think to avoid confusion when somebody said, well, I'm going up to Sam's Valley. Well, Sam's Valley is a pretty big space, especially then when travel was by horseback or foot. I think Moonville designated where the Sam's Valley post office was. I think that's the settlement, the community that was Moonville. Now, here we have the fact that Moonville was a voting place. Remember that second story building? Okay. And here we have a burial being reported. And here we have a photographer. Now that tells you there is a community. If a photographer is settling right there and setting himself up in Moonville, we're not just talking about a single building anymore. And remember, don't forget that plat of Sam's Valley town. So I looked at that news report that a photographer, Mr. Hicks, was setting up, and I thought, all right, we have only one photo of anyone from the Moon family. It's in the Southern Oregon Historical Society collection. It's the oldest son because Grant died as an infant and Charles was the next son born. I'm guessing that perhaps Mr. Hicks took this photograph. We know it was not taken by Peter Britt. I have no way to prove that. It's in the collection. It identifies this person as Charles Moon, but it does not have a date. And I'm not that good at distinguishing hairstyles and clothing styles. And there are people who do have expertise to tell us whether this is the right time period for that age, for him to have had that photograph taken then. Now, another event happening there in Moonville was a rally of the People's Party. There was a third political party trying to get some traction. And there was a social dance. And now here's a notice about a new store. Now, I did not find any stories about the building that we saw in 1884 being destroyed, but I keep finding references to new stores. So I don't know whether it burned down, whether something terrible happened, whether it became dilapidated, whether there was so much of a community they had more than one store. We don't know. Those are the kinds of historic pieces of information that we can delve for, but not always find.
Can I ask you a question?
Can you hold it, or does it really need to be now?
Sure.
Okay. I didn't say that, but if we could take questions at the end, that's more helpful. And I had no idea there were sulfur springs in the Sams Valley area. He was rusticating there. All right, here we have a candidates forum. This is Moonville is listed among a lot of other locations. If you know Jackson County, you can pick out these places and get a sense. This candidate was moving from place to place. Look at those dates in a row, 1, 2, 3, 6 days in a row, appearing at 1:30 in one location and then traveling to the next one and appearing at 7:30. That's a heavy load for a candidate. And I didn't look to see if he won. All right, here we have a box social. And now we have a railroad. Was there ever a railroad that went through Sams Valley? I have not researched this. I thought this was fascinating. Quite an extensive article. They were pretty excited about it, and I don't blame them. Several people went to Moonville for a sermon. That was another activity that was taking place. And now they're graveling the road. Progress. Where are we? We are in 1895. And they donated $100 worth of work towards graveling the road from Moonville to J.K. Moore's place at the lower end of the valley. And you can see that they were pretty sure that this would help the whole community. That's why they did it. Now we have court being held in Moonville. I found that really interesting. I had no idea that that was happening in Sams Valley at all, let alone in a place that isn't an official place on a map. Sams Valley is the place on the map, not Moonville. And just by coincidence, there is a mention of 3 of the Moons, Ralph, George, and Andrew. And I am pretty sure that this would be Andrew Jr. rather than Andrew Sr. at this, making this kind of a trip to be gone about 6 weeks. And now we have a lecture. You can see this is a happening place. And in 1897, someone has moved his store from Table Rock to Moonville. Now, Table Rock was a post office location. Now we have the 4th of July celebration. My goodness, we think of the 4th of July celebration as something that Ashland in particular makes a big deal out of, and Central Point today. And one of the news articles that I may not have shown you actually has people traveling to Moonville after the Ashland 4th of July celebration. I thought that was fascinating too. And here's one of my favorites. Henry Zimmerman of Upper Grave Creek. You all know where Grave Creek is. Started out for a hunt recently and got lost. He was out 2 days and finally found himself at Moonville. Yeah, that's quite a trek. A singing school. A store again. Now we have tragedy. Newman Moon and family and his sister, Mrs. Laura Davis, were on last evening's train from Klamathon to Gold Hill in answer to a telephone message that their father, A.S. Moon, was dangerously injured in a runaway team accident yesterday morning. Notice two major changes from the early days. There's a train they can travel on, and they received a message by telephone. Progress. Now, this is the obituary that appeared in the Gold Hill News, which has not yet been digitized. I'm hopeful that that will happen in the future. But thanks to Ruby Lacey and Lyda Childers, who abstracted genealogically relevant information from many, many newspapers, and Linda Morehouse Ganaugh, who did that from, I believe, no, this one was Ruby Lacey, who did it from later issues of the Gold Hill News. We have this information available to us without trying to hunt through microfilm, which I can tell you is deadly. It takes a long time. Now, this is a long obituary. I don't expect you to be reading the whole thing, but I did want to point out at the bottom, it says, Mr. Moon has a farm of 400 acres in Sam's Valley, but was living in Gold Hill. I have not done the land record research to figure out when, if I can, they moved to Gold Hill. I know they were in Moonville in 1893 because the children were in school there, but I have not done additional research to find out exactly when they moved. And here's one more story, and this was from the Ashland Tidings newspaper abstracts, which Ruby Lacey and Lyda Childers did. And this refers to the interment taking place at the Moonville Cemetery. So here it is in print, what is today known as the Pankey Park Cemetery. And by the way, there are no gravestones for Andrew and Melissa in that cemetery today. This is telling about that accident again and telling that he was buried in the Sam's Valley Cemetery. It's all the same cemetery. Another thing to challenge the genealogist and the historian. Now, then we have the story that Mrs. Newman Moon returned to Klamathon yesterday. Mr. Moon remained at Gold Hill until his brother George Moon of Idaho arrives. His sister Martha, who was recently married to a gentleman named Snipes, is expected this week from LeGrand. These are all really useful tidbits of information to help historians and genealogists with their research. But I did a little side trip. I did not know much about Klamathon, like where was it? So I just did some research and I lucked out because the California State University at Chico Miriam Library Special Collections has two photographs, which they gave me permission to use today, of Klamathon when the mill and the town were flourishing. And that was this, the photos are from 1898. The story took place in 1900. So this is where Newman Moon and his family, his wife, and Laura Davis and her husband and children lived. This is a closer up view of the mill with the village in the background. So you can get a little bit of a sense of what a thriving community Klamathon was. And this is what it looks like today. There's nothing there, just like Moonville. And this is a history of Klamathon, which you can look up on the internet. Now, back to Andrew dying in 1900 in a tragic accident. He was 69, just about to have his 70th birthday when he died. And I thought it would be interesting to delineate where Melissa had to reach out to let all of her children know what had happened. We'd already heard about Klamathon down in Siskiyou County. Charles was in Glendale. He was a gold miner. I think they called him a quartz miner in one of the stories. Ralph and Truman were up in Sherman County. At least one of them was in Kent. Kent is now on the internet a ghost town. There are a few structures very windswept and falling down. Beulah, George, and Martha were all in LeGrand. Martha's the one who had just married Mr. Snipes. And Andrew Jr. is in Mare Island, California, in the armed services, getting trained for the armed services. This is our snippets from the probate paper when Melissa applied to be the administratrix, I cannot say that word properly, of her husband's probate. He did not have a will. I hope you all have wills. It would simplify things. I've seen articles in the paper years later where she's still trying to get everything settled. But she also had quite a few children. 11 were alive at the time Andrew died to parcel things out to, if that was what she should have done. As the surviving spouse, she may have just inherited it all. I have not researched those rules of our Oregon laws. But I did want to go back to that slide. This is gold information for genealogists. It lists each child with how old they will be on their birthday in 1900. Wow. And where they were. This is great for people doing research. Now, here we are. Court is being held in Moonville. Religious meetings, Sunday evenings, and they were being bothered by hoodlums. Nothing has changed, has it? There were political candidates forums. There were deaths. This is all saying Moonville, not Sam's Valley. Real estate and notary public office were established in Moonville. Many items. This one, I really wish I had time to read to you. This is a wonderful description of Moonville. It does state that it's a country village founded in 1878 by Mr. A.S. Moon, pioneer farmer and merchant, 8 miles to the railroad, which was in Gold Hill. And it boasts 40 inhabitants. Now you have a sense of, at least in 1903, how many people were living right there, forming that the immediate community. I'm sure Moonville served a much wider part of Sam's Valley as well. Now, Mrs. Newman Moon, now living in Gold Hill, was in this vicinity yesterday, soliciting members for the Royal Neighbors of America. A camp will soon be organized. So this is another organization, social organization. We don't have the same kinds of organizations today that they did then. They didn't have the kind of entertainment that we have today. Whether that's good or bad is another question. And I love the last paragraph in this story. Miss Ardilla Gall is seen about the streets of Moonville, always in the best of humor. About the streets of Moonville. It wasn't a single street, obviously. And then we have a 4th of July barbecue and dance. And then we have the name of a place I'd never heard of. Well, that's what got me started on this whole presentation, because I'd never heard of Moonville. I am not going to research Debinger Gap except to show you where it is on the map. Sam's Valley is way down here, that post office location, the Moonville location, and Debinger Gap is way up here. Here's Sam's Valley Highway. There's Dodge Bridge Park right there. Okay. Sawmill in Moonville. And one of my favorites, the Moonville Giants baseball team. All right. Of course, they didn't show for their game, but that's another story. Daily stage service from Gold Hill to Moonville was already established. This story is saying it is going to be extended to Beagle. Someone asked me before I started the program, is Moonville close to Beagle? Well, it depends on how you're doing your transportation. What mode do you have? Here we go. We now have high school in Moonville. And a dance fracas. made a large story in the Mail Tribune in 1935. You notice we've moved quite a ways forward in time. Moonville is not being mentioned as many times as formerly. And here we have a story written by Fred Lockley, who interviewed many pioneers and about their history and published it in newspapers. He was wrote for the Oregon Journal, which was a Portland paper for many years. And many of those stories have been compiled. This one is telling that this person he was interviewing, Dr. John A. Chastain, settled in 1875 at Moonville on the Rogue River. Well, on the Rogue River is a comparative term. It wasn't actually on the river. Near, but not on. And the last mention that I found of Moonville in the Historic Oregon Newspapers Project is in 1958. And it wasn't a local paper. It was the Mill City Enterprise, which I had to look up to find out is in Lynn County. And this couple are celebrating their 60th wedding anniversary because they were married at Moonville in 1898. What happened to the Sams Valley Post Office? This is an actual postmark of Sams Valley. It's 1900. That was the earliest one that Nancy Swan had in her collection. She published for us, really, the discontinued post offices of Jackson County, which we have in a binder at the Genealogy Library. It's actually a philatelic exhibit, a stamp exhibit that she compiled. She's been collecting postmarks of discontinued Jackson County post offices. It's an amazing collection. So what did happen to Sams Valley Post Office? It was discontinued on October 19th of 1953, effective November 30th, with mail instead going to Gold Hill. It lasted a long time, 1873 to 1953. What happened to the Moons? Andrew and Melissa Moon had 13 children. 2 died when infants. When Andrew died in Gold Hill in the accident in 1900, at the age of 69, almost 70, he was survived by all 11 of the grown children. Melissa died in Bandon in Coos County in 1911 at the age of 65 of apoplexy. You may remember she was 15 years younger than Andrew. And she was survived by 10 children. And of course, I can't tell you all the genealogy, there just isn't time. But they had 27 grandchildren. 5 of the grandchildren died young, 4 of them before Melissa died. She was survived by 16 grandchildren, another was on the way, and 9 children were born after she died, 1 of whom died young. Now, because there isn't time for me to tell you the genealogy, which is some of my favorite parts of the story, I will share with you that I will be sharing the genealogy of the Andrew Moon in October at a free program at the Rogue Valley Genealogical Society. What I do want to say is that we owe a huge thank you to many people, many more people than we could ever list on a single slide or on many slides. These are some of the logos of some of the sources that I used, but some of the most important resources are the volunteers and some of the individuals like Ben Truey and Ruby Lacey and Lyda Childers and Linda Morehouse Gana and Nancy Swan and Jan Wright, who's currently the archivist at the Southern Oregon Historical Society. And all these other people, journalists and historians and genealogists and librarians and archivists, everyone together is why we can pull together and find all that history that otherwise would be lost. So I want to conclude by saying that this journey of discovery began out of simple curiosity, and it really did. I get sidelined very easily. It turned into a journey of rediscovery as I learned that Moonville was very much a real community located in a specific location in Sam's Valley, which is why I think the name lasted so long. I learned so much about Moonville and hope I've been able to share some of it with you today. I also learned a great deal about Andrew and Melissa Moon, their 13 children, and what happened to them. And so on October 17th at 1:30 at the Rogue Valley Genealogical Society, I will share their story. It includes a murder, a fatal logging accident, and a tragic accidental shooting death. Thank you all for coming.